Showtime. Welcome to the show. I'm Brent Holland, and welcome to Night Fright, folks. November 22nd, 1963, the John Kennedy assassination. Dealey Plaza. The motorcade rounds the corner to head along Elm Street. Shots ring out. The president is fatally wounded. Now, the Warren Commission was set up to examine this fatal shooting of the assassination. What they released as a conclusion was that it was one lone nut assassin by the name of Lee Harvey Oswald, who shot, purportedly, from upwards and behind. Now, anybody who has seen any of the films, and I'm showing one right now called the Zapruder film of the assassination, clearly sees the president's head jerk back and to the left. And I'm going to do a Kevin Costner thing from the movie JFK, back and to the left. Anybody that knows about the laws of physics knows that they're universal and they haven't changed from 1963 to 2011. They're the same. If your head goes back and to the left, that means whatever is causing that motion comes from the opposite direction. And that's what we're going to look at tonight. The science behind the fatal headshot. Our guest tonight, G. Paul Chambers, has written a great book, folks, and I urge you all to get this book. It's called The Science Behind the JFK Assassination. It is the first book to clearly identify the second murder weapon, to prove the locations of the assassins, and the important word there is locations, more than one. Demonstrate multiple shooters with scientific certainty. Folks, it is going to be an incredible show. Strap in and hang on, because here we go.
There is a time to question. There is a time for answers. There is a time to challenge. There is a time to speculate. There is a time for change. There is a time for truth. The time is now. Welcome to Night Fright, your voice in the dark for paranormal and conspiracy radio. And now your host, Brent Holland.
Welcome, 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 one and all. Welcome to Night Fright. I'm your host, Brent Holland. Now, our guest tonight, G. Paul Chambers, has written a book called Headshot, and we're going to be looking at the science behind where the actual shots came from that killed President Kennedy, November 22nd, 1963. Just let me read a little bit about Paul's bio here as I reach for my glasses. G. Paul Chambers has worked as a contractor for the NASA Goddard Optics branch and is currently working on the development of renewable energy sources with Bellatrix Energy, LLC. Formerly, he worked as a supervisory research physicist for the Energetic Materials and Detonation Sciences Department of the Naval Surface Warfare Center in Maryland, and as a research physicist for the Condensed Matter and Radiation Sciences Division of the Naval Research Lab. This guy has credentials up the yin-yang, folks, in Washington, D.C. Paul, I want to welcome you to the show.
Well, thanks, Brent. It's great to be here.
Thank you for joining us. Paul, let's start off, shall we? What got you involved in the JFK assassination?
Well, I've always had an interest in the assassination, but a few years ago, I got a copy of a book by Vincent Bugliosi, who's famous for the Charles Manson case. This is a huge book. It's almost 2,000 pages long. They say you start reading in high school and you finish it when you retire. But as a scientist, I immediately jumped to the chapter he had on the physics and the Zapruder film and so forth. And I started reading it and becoming a little bit agitated, as a lot of material in there just wasn't accurate. Then I read on page 488, he says, well, I had avoided taking physics in high school, and then it dawned on me what the problem was here. So I started off writing a letter to him, and I showed it to a friend. He said, well, don't do that. Why don't you just write your own book? So that's what happened.
Gotcha. Paul, what were his conclusions, and how were they inaccurate? And I know Vincent Bugliosi's work, and folks, it's all over the place. Really, it's a deplorable book, and his research, to put it mildly, and his interviews, he leaves out pertinent sections and everything else. Paul, what was it about his book, in specific, the research, that just had you turning your head and going, oh my God?
Just some basic laws of physics, like conservation of momentum, for instance. I mean, he thinks that a bullet can't push a head backwards because it's too small. Well, it has nothing to do with size. It's the combination of size and velocity that gives you a momentum. So you can use that law, which says the initial momentum of the system has got to be the same as the final momentum. So if his head recoils back, that means the bullet struck him moving very, very fast and lodged inside his skull, and now his head has to absorb all that recoil momentum. So that's a starting point to calculate exactly how fast the bullet was going, where it came from, because momentum is a vector, which means it has a magnitude and a direction. And that information is enough to back out actually what bullet and what gun was used.
Okay, we're going to get into that in just a second. Just let me tell folks who we're speaking with, Paul.
You're listening to Night Fright, your voice in the dark for paranormal and conspiracy radio. The time is now. And now your host, Brent Holland.
Folks, we're speaking with G. Paul Chambers. He's the author of a new book out that is groundbreaking and explosive. And I use that word with all sincerity because he's examined the science behind the Kennedy assassination and where the headshot, the fatal headshot that you're watching on the Zapruder film right now, originated from. Now, as I said at the outset of the show, there was a commission that was set up called the Warren Commission just after President Kennedy's assassination in 1963. It was a blue ribbon commission, but their findings were not blue ribbon, to put it mildly. Their findings said that it was one lone nut assassin by the name of Lee Harvey Oswald that shot from above and behind the president in a place called the Texas School Book Depository on the 6th floor. As we're going to find out tonight, there was more than one shooter in Dealey Plaza that day, and more than one shooter means automatically, as definition, a conspiracy. Let's go back to Paul now and talk a little bit about the science. Now, you had mentioned vectors and stuff. Can we break that down in layman's terms so the folks can understand the principles behind the physics?
Well, Isaac Newton says that every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So if you're struck by an object, your body has to absorb that recoil momentum. Just if a boxer hits you in the jaw, your head would have to do something. It wouldn't just stand there, and you wouldn't lean into the punch. It would go back. And that's what happens to Kennedy. To argue that the bullet comes from behind and his head recoils backwards makes no sense whatsoever. And there have been various ridiculous theories like jetting. The jetting would have to be traveling faster than the speed of sound and faster than the bullet to make that work. It's just none of those things hypotheses work out. And I explain in the book why they're all wrong. And you can prove them wrong with simple experiments that you can do in your home.
You say simple experiments you can do in your home. What are those experiments, Paul?
Well, one would be conservation momentum. You can go down your basement and check out when one pool ball contacts another, where does it go? Well, it's going to have to absorb that momentum, and it will also go in the direction of the initial momentum. Now, you could hit it a glancing blow, but when you sum the momentum of the cue ball and the object ball, they will give you a vector pointing in the direction of the original ball was going in. So there are air hockey tables, another good way to test that. There are also simple experiments you can do to test human reaction times. And what you can see from the Zapruder film is that, for instance, Governor Connolly is not reacting at all, and Kennedy has already got his hands to his throat. So he's already well into his reaction, but Connolly is sitting there completely unreacted. So to argue that the bullet struck them both would suggest that there were very gross differences in human reaction times. The bullet's traveling so fast, and they're only 3 feet apart, it's milliseconds between them. Meanwhile, human reaction times are the order of several hundred milliseconds. So the reaction times rule it out. and the physics of that assassination rules it out as well.
Okay, we're going to break down that Zapruder film. Folks, I just want to tell you that Governor Connolly was sitting directly in front of President Kennedy. And we're going to talk about that magic bullet that everybody's heard of as well, where one bullet is supposed to have gone through President Kennedy's back, gone upwards, come out his throat, and made 7 wounds in Governor Connolly. It's absolutely absurd. On top of that, it is reputed that this bullet, which was found, is in pristine condition. There's more fragments from that bullet that were left inside Governor Connolly's wrist than are missing from this reported bullet. But we're going to get to that in a second.
You're listening to Night Fright, your voice in the dark for paranormal and conspiracy radio. The time is now. And now your host, Brent Holland.
Headshot. That's the name of the book. The author is G. Paul Chambers, our guest tonight. The science behind the JFK assassination. Paul, of course, as I mentioned before, is a physicist. He came to this. He was reading a book by Vincent Bugliosi, which I can't not urge you all to get, unfortunately. It is continuing the misconception that it was not a conspiracy and it was one lone nut assassin by the name of Lee Harvey Oswald committed this dastardly act and assassinated President Kennedy. I want to go back to Paul now. Paul, the Warren Commission, as I stated before, said that he was shot indeed from the Texas School Book Depository, which was behind President Kennedy to his right and from a downward position. Is there any evidence at all that perhaps a shot originated from that location?
Well, there's one shot that struck Kennedy in the back that was noted at the official autopsy, but the bullet didn't penetrate through his body. They couldn't find a clear path through the body. Later, they conjectured that somehow it bounced around inside his body and came out his throat, and then happened to re-angle itself back down again so it could go on to hit Connolly and create all these wounds. Now, the reason they had to do that was primarily because while Oswald might have gotten off 3 shots in 6 seconds, he could not have gotten off 4 shots. And we know there's a final fatal headshot that hits Kennedy that caused the recoil we discussed. Another bullet strikes a bystander, James Teague, in the street. That's 2. If 2 separate bullets hit Kennedy and Connolly, I've got 4 shots. Even Oswald can't get off 4 shots in 6 seconds with that rifle. The best marksman, it was over 2.5 seconds to get off a shot with the Carcano. So immediately, if the single bullet theory fails, you know there's a conspiracy. There has to be another shooter somewhere in Dealey Plaza. And that's why the Warren Commission stuck on that point. And in fact, all the commission members did not agree with it. In the official findings, they say, Governor Connolly's testimony and other factors give rise to a difference in opinion as to the probability of the single bullet theory. Nonetheless, we all think Oswald acted alone. Well, that's like saying the Epimenides paradox. The statement below is false, and then you get down, the statement above is true. It's a paradox. It can't be one without the other. So when you see a paradox in an official government statement, you know it's disinformation. You know it's wrong.
Absolutely. Folks, we're speaking with G. Paul Chambers tonight. His book, Headshot. I just want to orient you to the car. If you're looking at the photo right next to me, you can see that driving the car is Special Agent Will Greer. He is from the Bill Greer. He's from the Secret Service. Right next to him is Special Agent Kellerman, Roy Kellerman, also a Secret Service agent. Right behind Mr. Kellerman is Governor Connolly. To the left of Governor Connolly is his wife, of course. Behind Mrs. Connolly is President Kennedy's wife, Jacqueline Kennedy, and of course right beside Jacqueline and behind the governor is President Kennedy himself. So that was the car. Now we're going to discuss a little bit about James Teague and why that shot is so important. James Teague, folks, was the 3rd person that was wounded in Dealey Plaza that day. You see, there was President Kennedy was wounded, of course, fatally. Governor Connolly was wounded, but he survived it. James Teague was wounded and survived it. James Teague was standing near the triple overpass. The triple overpass was in front of President Kennedy's motorcade. He was standing there just watching the motorcade when all of a sudden he was struck in the cheek by either a fragment or some kind of shot that originated from behind the president. And what makes that stunning is the fact that the Warren Commission had 3 empty bullet shells from the Texas School Book Depository. They said that because there was 3 bullets, empty shells, there was only 3 shots, so they accounted for all of them. One of the shots going into President Kennedy's back, another shot, this is before the magic bullet theory, another shot going directly into Governor Connolly, and of course a fatal shot blowing off President Kennedy's head. Then along comes James Tate just as the report is being printed, and he says, no, guess what, folks? I was hit too. So now they've got 4 wounds with only 3 bullets. And hence, Arlen Specter creates this magic bullet. And what the magic bullet is, folks, is what we're going to discuss right now. Paul, can we go into the magic bullet, my friend, and discuss the absurdity of this thing as it dances around in bodies and comes out in pristine?
Everyone else calls it a magic bullet. I call it an impossible bullet. If your bullet has to violate the laws of physics, it's wrong. It can't happen that way. And the problem is the bullet hits Kennedy in the back at a downward angle, and we all know if it does that, it's going to come out his chest. Okay, so we know also that the lungs were damaged because that was clear on the official autopsy with a contusion to the lung, which consistent with the Dallas doctors indicated they couldn't maintain integrity of the respiratory system. So if a bullet comes in your back at a downward angle, hits your lung, how does it get to the trachea? How does it do that? It's got to deflect back and upwards, right? In order to do that, it's got to deflect off soft tissue. Soft tissue has a density of about 1 gram per cc. The bullet has a density of about 8 to 10 grams per cc. The copper jacket's about 9 grams. The lead's a little heavier. So you're looking at a very dense bullet traveling faster than the speed of sound, 2,000 feet per second. And all of a sudden that bullet deflects by his lung, not even by his rib cage, but by his lung, somehow upward to his trachea. And then it deflects back down again so it can hit Connolly at a downward angle. So the physics of that is just absolutely and utterly impossible. It was a very good test done by a group in Adelaide, Australia, a few years ago, sponsored by the Discovery Channel. They lined up 2 dummies. One was a gel man, which is a ballistics gel put over a skeleton. And they had 2 of them lined up, horizontally. Everyone says, well, my God, Kennedy and Connolly were lined up perfectly for the shot. Okay, fine. But the problem is the vertical path the bullet has to take. They hit the first dummy in the back. It comes out his chest. It doesn't come out his throat. You can see clearly in the video coming out his chest. Not consistent right there. It goes on to hit Connolly, punches through his body, breaks his ribs. Everything's good. Then it hits his wrist. They have a gel simulated wrist. It bounces off. But the real bullet that hit Connolly goes through him, shatters his wrist, leaves, as you alluded to, 3 grains of fragments inside, which exceeds the most mass the bullet could have lost was 2 grains. You've already got 3 in his wrist, plus some fragments in Kennedy's neck, plus it lodges in his leg. So the whole thing just collapses like a house of cards. And as you discussed, there was only 3 casings found in the school book depository. 4 shots means another shooter, and that means, as you said, a conspiracy. And just that information alone forces you to that conclusion. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm a conspiracy empiricist because that's what the data forces you to conclude. There's no other possibilities consistent with the laws of physics.
You're listening to Night Fright, your voice in the dark for paranormal and conspiracy radio. The time is now. And now your host, Brent Holland.
Folks, you're going to want to get this book. It's explosive. It's groundbreaking. It's called Headshot. It's the actual science behind the Kennedy assassination done by a physicist. Incredible research, folks. This is groundbreaking. Why the mainstream media won't attach itself to this finding, I have no idea, given the fact that several weeks ago, fans of this show will know that I had Lamar Waldron on, and Lamar Waldron interviewed 2 of JFK's closest aides, and they were in the follow-up car directly behind JFK's motorcade. They saw the shooter from the Grassy Knoll. They were asked to leave that out of their reports because of national security, and the FBI just wanted to move on and get it over with. We're going to come back to the whys and hows after, but right now I want to go back to Paul. Easy way to get his book, by the way, folks. I should mention this over and over again. www.nightfrightshow.com. bookcover.com. Just click on the book cover associated with the guest. That'll take you right to a place where you can order this book from the comfort of your own home. And indeed, folks, this is riveting stuff. It's explained meticulously. His research is meticulous. This is the real deal, folks. Let's go back to the Kennedy assassination and that fanciful bullet called the magic bullet. Now, we've got James Tague's just been hit. Arlen Specter's come up. Arlen Specter, folks, was with the Warren Commission, and they virtually had to stop the presses of the Warren Commission and go back and invent this magic bullet theory, which was absolutely absurd. And we've just explained why it's absurd. In your findings, Paul, where did you think that some of the shots originated from? You had mentioned that perhaps some of them came from behind President Kennedy. Is there any other locations that they may have come from?
Different locations. There were multiple locations in the school book depository. Another shooter could have been at a window that was closer to the street than the school book depository. So some theorized another one could have been at that location. And in fact, there were multiple guns found in that book depository. There was a .22 found there, another gun found. There was a whole bunch of guns in there, it turned out at the time. And another location was the Dow Tex building, which was behind that, which would always given a nice clear shot. It's possible the bullet that lodged in Kennedy's back was fired from a .22 caliber, small caliber, so it wouldn't penetrate him from that location. There's also some locations on the triple underpass of the bridge. There's a location on the far side where the shot that struck him in the neck could have come from. But the most likely shot, I think we can say with certainty, with scientific certainty, that one shot comes from the Grassy Knoll. And that you arrive to that conclusion with a series of scientific records. And they form two things. One is the Zapruder film. And you can analyze that using laws of physics, conservation of momentum, and back out where that final shot came from by just looking at the angle of his head recoil, tracing that back along a line, and you get a position right behind the picket fence, about 8 feet from the side of the fence on the Grassy Knoll. That's the exact location that the House Select Committee came to analyzing acoustic records or on a dictabelt recording. Now, that committee was formed in the 70s in response to public outcry. The Zapruder film was shown on Geraldo Rivera's show in 75. It was clear from what you talked about originally that recoil, boy, it didn't, looks like a shot up in the front. And the public outswell become enormous at the time. So they formed a House Select Committee to examine not only that assassination, but other ones as well, like Martin Luther King and so forth. And they came across a dictabelt recording that appeared to have gunfire on that tape.
Can you tell the folks what a dictabelt recording is, and then we'll get into that?
Well, it's a primitive kind of recording device. It's not as sophisticated as even a tape recorder back at that time. Probably uses some stylus type thing, and today it's been viewed so many times that the grooves have worn down and you can't even get it anymore. But taped records were made of the dictabelt, and this was a technology the police at that time used to record conversations over walkie-talkies, etc. And there was an open mic somewhere in that motorcade that was causing this recording to be made. And this was found years after, locked in a safe or something.
So there is a recording, and what does that recording show?
Well, a number of experts, people who did sonar analysis, a number of firms like BBN, Bolt, Barasic, and Atkinson looked at this recording and concluded that there was a series of sounds consistent with gunfire. And the way they looked at that was to look at acoustic signatures, acoustic waves or shock waves in air. When a bullet is fired and sees a speed of sound, you get like a sonic boom effect. That's like when you crack the end of a whip, you hear that loud noise. That's like that's because the tip is exceeding the speed of sound. Or when a jet flies through the sound barrier, you hear that boom. Well, you hear the crack of a rifle is when that bullet exceeds. And so you get a very consistent echo pattern because those sounds are echoing off structures in Dealey Plaza. So one wave is going to come quickly, but another is going to bounce off buildings and bounce off other buildings. So what they did ultimately was do a series of live fire tests where they took marksmen in Dealey Plaza, fired shots from the Grassy Knoll into sandbags, fired shots from the school book depository. Then they lined Dealey Plaza with microphones every 10 feet or so. So they had a series of microphones listening to all these shots, and they could match up acoustic signatures identically with gunshots in Dealey Plaza. And they could tell exactly when they came in relation to each other and where they came from. And one of the shots gives a perfect match to a shot from the Grassy Knoll at an exact location that you get from the Zapruder film.
Really? Wow.
Real.
No, but this is earth-shattering because, all of a sudden you've got you've got your research, right? You've got these a whole series of witnesses seeing the shooter from the Grassy Knoll. And now you've got the audio, Dictabelt audio recordings also giving the same results. This is explosive information, folks.
You're listening to Night Fright, your voice in the dark for paranormal and conspiracy radio. The time is now. And now your host, Brent Holland.
Folks, our guest today is G. Paul Chambers. He's got a book called Headshot, The Science Behind the JFK Assassination. This is going to blow everything you know about the JFK assassination right out the window because this is the real deal. This actually guarantees that there was a shooter right at where everybody knows there was a shooter, the Grassy Knoll. And finally we have the science to prove that. There was also smoke seen from the Grassy Knoll. S.M. Holland, who was again on that triple overpass, a whole bunch of his crew, he's a railway guy, saw smoke coming from that. One of the arguments in Bugliosi's book, going back to his awful book, says that, oh no, new bullets don't give up any smoke. Well, that isn't entirely true, is it?
No, any kind of explosive will never react 100%. To have no smoke would be an 100% reaction. In other words, you've got a solid material called a nitrocellulose compound that will react, and when it does that, it'll produce gases, and those gases are very hot and expand very rapidly. That's what propels the bullet down the gun. But if they reacted completely so that you got perfect gas formation, you wouldn't have any particulates, which means no smoke. But that's not a reality. That never happens in reality. So any gun will give off some smoke. In this particular gun, it was a custom round because we know it's a frangible round. We'd see that from the medical evidence, x-rays, etc. And Cyril Weck, if I could name drop, he was a forensic expert on medical data, and he wrote letters to the House Committee and explained that it must have been a frangible round that impacted and shattered inside of his skull to produce the x-ray patterns that they saw. But I'm going around this a lot. The round was a custom round, which meant he could have put potentially black powder in there, which would produce copious smoke. Now, I wouldn't put that in my hunting rifle, but it could have been used at that time. So there are conceivable explanations for lots of smoke. And in fact, a lot of witnesses saw smoke. There are 50 witnesses, if you count them all up, who either saw a shooter, heard the shots, or saw smoke at the location of the Grassy Knoll. So it's overwhelming. Just the witness.
Absolutely. It makes you wonder why this knowledge about physics has been around since 1963. It makes me wonder why the Warren Commission never instituted somebody to examine this the way Paul has.
That's an interesting question, and in his book, David Lifton's Best Evidence, he kind of answers that because everyone in the commission is a lawyer. No one has a background in science, and when he tried to explain the science to them, they said, science doesn't matter. All that matters is what I can prove to a jury. And if you put your expert on and he starts talking science, by God, I'll get another expert and he'll talk other science and they'll cancel each other out, so it doesn't matter. And he has a beautiful section describing this in the book, and it's laughable from a scientific perspective. The truth isn't what you can prove to a jury. If it was, NASA would be using juries to design the space shuttle, I guarantee.
That's funny. G. Paul Chambers is our guest tonight, folks. If you're just joining us, stick around. Got lots of time left, at least a half an hour. We're examining the JFK assassination again. As you know, fans of this show, nobody covers the JFK assassination, Bobby's assassination, Martin Luther King's assassination, or even Malcolm X's like Night Fright. We go right into getting all the top researchers, and we have one again tonight. His name is G. Paul Chambers. His book is called Headshot, www.nightfrightshow.com. Click on the book cover. That'll take you right to a place where you can get this book online from the comfort of your own home. And what's fascinating about this book, and explosive and revealing, the science behind the headshot originating from the Grassy Knoll. As everybody's known since 1963, there was more than one shooter in Dealey Plaza that day, November 22nd, 1963. We're going to get into the cover-up and speculate why in a few minutes, but I want to continue with this. You had mentioned the Dow Tex building before. Now, the Dow Tex building, folks, is behind the president again. It would be situated about here, the Texas School Book Depository, the motorcade heading down this way, and of course the Grassy Knoll heads it out. Kind of an L shape, which is a classic assassination type of scenario. Now, what's interesting about the Dow Tex building is the first thing, 1998, I believe it was, there was a spent shell found on the top of this building. Now, what the hell that's doing in a downtown plaza, who knows? The other thing is, on the third floor, somebody had called the police to come and check out a suspicious person moments after the assassination, walking along the third floor. Now, a lot of people think that the shots originated from the Dow Tex building on the third floor as well. This fellow was arrested and his name was Braden. As it turns out, he was a key mafioso man. He was released. They found no connection between him and the assassination, but what's alarming is his excuse for being on the third floor. He told people he was looking for a phone to call his mother to tell her about the assassination. Let's fast forward to 1968 right away. The Ambassador Hotel, Los Angeles. Bobby Kennedy's just been shot, June 6, 1968. A few blocks away, guess who's spotted again? Mr. Braden. Coincidence? Let's go back to Paul. Paul, let's go back. This is fascinating research. It's explosive. Why do you think the mainstream media is staying away from this? Have anybody from ABC, NBC, CNN called you? CBS? I'll do
No, I've been on a number of radio shows across the country. I've been in the Alan Handelman show in North Carolina and on a show in Drive Time Chicago, WGN Chicago radio. But no one from ABC is called, surprisingly, not surprisingly. And it's a good question. Why is the news media ignoring this subject? If you write a book and say Oswald act alone, they're all only too happy to put you on their TV shows. But if you try to tell the truth, they're not interested. So I guess there could be several explanations. One is that the news media has been in the tank for this with the Warren Commission report. They've said, okay, it's real. Back in the 60s, if you look at CBS News, they came out and said, well, there's a lot of questions here, but we have to give the weight to the Warren Commission. And after that, everything from that has been monolithic. The Warren Commission is right. Everybody else is wrong. Oliver Stone's, he's completely trying to trick the public. And everybody writes anything else is trying to fool you and blah, blah, blah. And so they've been so deep in the tank for this, for them to reverse course now would damage their credibility as well. So the government's already pronounced what's happened. They're not going to change their view. The news media got on board and now they're stuck. That's one explanation. The other is that the government has told the news media, you better be quiet about this. There were a number of deaths associated with the Kennedy assassination. Dorothy Kilgallen was a reporter who interviewed Jack Ruby, who killed Lee Harvey Oswald. She died mysteriously before she could ever make that interview public. So there may be a fear factor involved. And maybe if I were an editor of a newspaper, I might be a little nervous and queasy about it too. I can't say that I wouldn't be. So there may be a number of reasons why the mainstream press will not touch this subject today. And it's very tragic on a number of levels.
Paul, have people tried to discredit your work, your book?
No one's tried to discredit me. Some people have written bad reviews. People in the Kennedy community write bad reviews about me because I disagree with what some other people in that community say. Who don't necessarily have a background in physics, but everybody's got their buddies and their friends. And one reviewer in the mainstream media wrote that I have more credentials than Oliver Stone, but my work wasn't definitive. Well, he didn't trash it. He just said it wasn't definitive. I think it's beyond definitive because I prove on a number of levels that the government position of one shooter is not possible in any level. I mean, it's just disproven over and over again in the book. So that's basically where we are. And unfortunately, I just haven't had an opportunity to get out into the mainstream so far.
Okay, fair enough. Oh, absolutely. It's explosive, folks. I mean, this is the real deal. This is the science. absolute science, you know. You cannot dispute science. If 1 and 1 adds up to 2, it's going to be 2. 100 years ago, it's going to be 2 1,000 years from now. It's the science. The laws of physics don't change. They're universal. 1963 holds true to 2011. Headshots, the name of the book. G. Paul Chambers, our guest tonight. We're discussing the science behind how he's come to the conclusion that there was indeed another shooter in Dealey Plaza that day from the infamous Grassy Knoll. And he's got the science to prove it. I urge you all to get this book. It covers a lot more than just the science as well, folks. It covers why he speculates, why Kennedy was killed, why the conspiracy. Let's talk about that now, shall we, Paul? www.nightfrightshow.com, by the way, folks. Click on the book cover, get this book.
You're listening to Night Fright, your voice in the dark for paranormal and conspiracy radio. The time is now. And now your host, Brent Holland.
Why do you speculate Mr. Kennedy was killed? What powers was he threatening? Do you think this was just obviously more than one shooter? It had to be conspiracy? Speculations?
I think the purpose of the book is to demonstrate there's at least one additional shooter. There are likely more than one additional shooter, but there's at least one. And as you say, once you've got 2, you've got a conspiracy. The odds of 2 guys would be shooting at him of their own violation without prior coordination within the same 6 seconds is just astronomically small. It would involve lottery or something. So one extra guy means conspiracy. So that means other people were involved. And because it was covered up so well for so long, it suggests it's not necessarily a small conspiracy. Vincent Bugliosi says, you know, I know how to keep a secret. 3 people can keep a secret if 2 of them are dead. Well, you know, that's the truth. And unfortunately, as I've alluded to, there are a lot of deaths since the time of the Kennedy assassination. And a lot of them were mysterious deaths under very mysterious circumstances. And some people have calculated the probabilities of that, and they get astronomical numbers. So, you know, the chances that people were silenced, it could be very real here.
Absolutely.
It's just a scary business.
And folks, as you know, for those of you that have seen the movie JFK, at the beginning of the movie, there's a young prostitute by the name of Rose Cheramy who's being thrown out of a car. Well, that happened prior to the Kennedy assassination, a couple of days before that, and she ended up dead afterwards as well. She was telling the authorities that Kennedy was about to be hit on November 22nd. She was found November 20th at the side of the road, and she was telling everybody. On top of that, the same day, 2 shooters were chased out of Dealey Plaza, November 20th, 2 days before the assassination, targeting their rifles by police officers. They never caught them. I mean, the list goes on and on and on, and this is stuff that has come out through Freedom of Information Act requests. You won't hear about this again on the mainstream press, only on Night Fright, it seems. We're going to cover this stuff, and I'm going to cover it until full disclosure is out there. www.nightfrightshow. Click on the archives. There's over 26 first-person witnesses, people that were in Dealey Plaza that day, including James Tague, as we alluded to before. His story is there. Ted Sorensen, who is JFK's speechwriter, his story is there as well. All the top-notch researchers. First African-American Secret Service agent was not on duty that day, protecting President Kennedy. Abraham Bolden, his story is there. He blew the whistle on the Secret Service after the assassination, claiming that they were all drunk and that was a status quo for them to be drunk on duty. As it turns out, they were drunk. Many of them had been awake all night, drinking at a bar. And you know, when you're a little bit hungover and it's warm out and you haven't slept, well, your reaction time is almost zilch. And that, you know, you see the Zapruder film and you see how the only person to react was Clint Hill, and everybody else is kind of standing there and on the side of the car looking up and looking away, and nobody's reacting. Meantime, the person they're supposed to be guarding is dead.
One of the things that strikes you about that film is when you look at Kennedy come down the road, the first thing that leaps out at you is there's nobody anywhere near him. No policeman, no Secret Service. You can't see anyone anywhere close to this guy. And the really tragic thing is that at the point just before he's shot in the head, the final shot, the driver is looking back at Kennedy. He stops the car dead in the road. Absolute comes to a dead stop. the bullet hits Kennedy's head, and then the driver turns around and takes off. I mean, it's very, very suspicious, to say the least.
Oh, absolutely, without question. Without question, I agree with you wholeheartedly. Also, another thing that's in the JFK movie, and this is a true fact, folks, all the Secret Service agents were accounted for that day. They all went with Kennedy to Parkland Hospital. Yet when a patrolman by the name of Roger Smith, if I'm not mistaken, hopped the fence at the Grassy Knoll, guess what he comes across? He comes across the Secret Service agents with full credentials telling him to keep searching. True story. Absolutely a conspiracy, without question.
I had a chance to talk with G. Robert Blake, who headed the 78 committee, and he said he checked every federal agency. There was no federal agent of any kind on that Grassy Knoll. So someone was there with official credentials who no one wants to take responsibility for. Someone who shouldn't have been there.
What's your work like with NASA? You still working for them?
I'm not working for them right now. I used to do work, supported the optics division, mostly optical design work and work with infrared sensing and so forth.
Very cool, buddy. Very cool.
You're listening to Night Fright, your voice in the dark for paranormal and conspiracy radio. The time is now. And now your host, Brent Holland.
Our guest today, of course, G. Paul Chambers, headshot. He's a physicist, folks. He's done the science. He's got the results. There was a shooter from the Grassy Knoll. www.nightfrightshow.com. Just click on the book cover. That'll take you right to a place where you can order it from the comfort of your own armchair. Let's go back to Dealey Plaza, November 22nd, 1963, with Paul. Paul, when you took a look at the Zapruder film, we see Kennedy's hands come up, what I suspected was the first or second shot. He receives a frontal shot from the throat. Is there any chance that that shot could have originated from the Grassy Knoll as well?
Yeah, it sure could have. There could have been two shots fired from the Grassy Knoll. Some witnesses claim to have heard two shots fired from that position. It's clearly a shot fired from in front. The shot that hits him in the back, the Secret Service agent who you alluded to, Kellerman, sitting in the front seat, told the Warren Commission he heard Kennedy exclaim, "I've been hit." Well, if Kennedy's hit in the throat, he's not going to be exclaiming anything because his windpipe is ruptured and he can't be talking at that point. So the first shot hits him in the back. He says, "My God, I've been hit." The second shot then hits him in the throat. Could have originated from the Grassy Knoll. Could have originated from another position somewhere in front of him, but that's where he reacts and clutches his throat. And slumps slightly.
Paul, you were just a kid, I suspect, when Kennedy was killed. What was the buzz in that era? What were your parents telling you, teachers, church leaders, etc.? What were they telling you? Were they believing the Warren Commission? Was there speculation that perhaps it was all bunk, as we've come to believe?
I was a child. I was in elementary school when Kennedy was shot. The teacher called us in and said that the president's been shot in the head. That didn't sound good. And sent us all home. And I remember being very afraid, very panicky at that time. And, I confided in my mother, "Boy, what's going to happen?" She says, I don't know. Everyone was worried. My parents at that time, he didn't really question the government. He believed the government was benign and good and was going to look out for you. And for years, she always said, if they just hadn't let Oswald back in the country, Kennedy would still be alive. And I'm afraid that's not the case. Kennedy would be dead whether Oswald was in the country or not, sadly.
Sadly enough. When did you start to question? Was it Vincent Bugliosi's book that you started to question the Warren Commission's findings, or was it prior to that?
1980, a really good book came out by David Lifton called Best Evidence. And that's an exhaustive book. He spent about 15 years writing that book. He talked with people on the Warren Commission. He talked with some scientists at the area, and he concluded that not only was it a conspiracy, but the medical autopsy evidence had been altered. And a lot of people laugh at that. That couldn't be possible. I got news for you. Something happened somewhere, because when he came to the official autopsy, when they pulled him out of the coffin and unwrapped him, the first thing one of the medical doctors there says is surgery of the head. And that's recorded by FBI agents Sibbert and O'Neill, who were in the room. There was no surgery done to Kennedy's head at Dallas. All they did was the tracheotomy and some other work to try and restore respiration. The neurosurgeon in Dallas took one look at Kennedy's head wound and said, "It's inoperable. There's nothing that can be done." That was...
Yeah.
So
and, Please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Once the data is corrupted or altered, you can't base your model on. This is the failing of the Warren Commission. They're basing their model on corrupted data. Someone's distorted the data and monkeyed around with it and so forth. And as a scientist, you immediately dismiss corrupted data. If you know there's someone's been tampering with it, immediately throw it out and redo the experiment. Unfortunately, in the paradigm of the lawyers, we can use the corrupted data and so forth. Sorry, it doesn't work that way. It's a guaranteed way to get the wrong answer. The other thing the Warren Commission did, by the way, was alter the data. Gerald Ford wasn't happy that Kennedy was shot in the back, so he decided, well, I'm going to fudge it a little bit. We'll move the wound to his neck. Okay, now it works out. Shoot him in the back of the neck. Okay, it'll come out his throat. Everything works out well. When you corrupt data, two ways to absolutely get the wrong answer. Base your model on corrupted data, alter the data yourself. Guarantee you'll get it wrong every time. And those are the things the Warren Commission did. And one of the reasons, among others, that they completely got the wrong answer.
And that's a true story, folks, by the way. That is President Gerald Ford, because before he was president in 1963. He was indeed a member of that Warren Commission. And Kennedy was shot midway in the back, 6 inches from the throat, and he moved that up so it would be in the back of his neck. Now, he didn't physically move up the shot, but he moved up the report, and he admitted to that later on. The other thing Gerald Ford was doing at the time was feeding information to the FBI on the Warren Commission. He was feeding information so they could adjust the FBI's information back into the Warren Commission. A lot of stuff going on there, folks. A lot of stuff going on. G. Paul Chambers is our guest this afternoon. We're talking about his book, Headshot, The Science Behind the JFK Assassination. He is a physicist. He's the real deal, folks. He's examined the Zapruder film and other films, and he's taken a look at the science behind where the headshot originated from. And guess what he's found out? It indeed originates from the Grassy Knoll. Now, that's the Grassy Knoll everybody's heard about since 1963, where everybody said that they, in Dealey Plaza, said they felt that the shots came from there. We've got two of Kennedy's top aides in the Lamar Waldron show on the Night Fright website. You can check it out there, nightfrightshow.com. It's right along here. Listen to that show. We had Dr. Robert McClelland on the show. He was the surgeon who worked on JFK, and he said that the wounds he witnessed on JFK that day do not match the autopsy photos. Again, a cover-up. This JFK assassination, and then a few years later, we've got Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, 66, Martin Luther King, April 1968, and Bobby only a couple of months later in June 1968. There seems to be the same, from what I've examined, the same templates used over and over and over again. You mentioned before that the dicta belt came out, the recording of the President Kennedy's assassination. Apparently, I don't know if you know this, Paul, but there is a recording that was made and it's just come to light of the Bobby Kennedy assassination. And they've done the same analysis. You look surprised.
I heard this, but it's interesting.
Okay, it's very interesting because they found more than the amount of shots that they say hit Bobby Kennedy. And, conspiracy. There's something there, folks. There was something there. The same templates, same names come up over and over and over again. Easy way to get this book, www.nightfrightshow.com. Have you had any negative feedback about your science, your experiments? Has anybody refuted or trying to go after you and saying, no, this isn't exactly correct?
Mainly the people who go after me are people who are already in the conspiracy community. They all believe there's a conspiracy, but they disagree with particulars of what weapon was used, where it was, et cetera, and they've got entrenched viewpoints. And a lot of times their friend has come out with a book that says something different than what I say, and so they're not really interested in the physics. They're more interested in what their friend had to say. So they write some negative reviews. This fellow Bob Hay, his name was Hay, who wrote a review on some website, and his friend of his wrote a book that just is different than mine, but his physics, I'm sorry, isn't quite right. Sometimes I got a lot of good reviews on Amazon. I've gotten some bad reviews, people who said it can't happen, that haven't quite read the book or don't understand it. Sometimes when I've done radio shows, people call in, usually people who I think work for the government and who keep chiding me on a certain point over and over again, but usually they're trying to drag me onto their ground. But once you look at it from a scientific standpoint, where in the scientific world, the data rules, always go by the data. When I worked at Naval Research Lab, Dr. Nagel was head of the condensed matter division. He said, always go with the data, go with the data. I've never forgotten that. And the data tells you something very specific. There's at least one shot. There's multiple shooters, and there's at least one shot coming from the Grassy Knoll. We can tell the exact position.
Back into the left, back into the left. Are there peer reviews that have you submitted your paper to any peer review magazines or anything of that nature?
There have been peer-reviewed work. There's a Journal of Forensics in Britain that published a work by on acoustics was published a few years ago, and then another group of scientists, some of them at IBM, others worked with a very famous physicist at Harvard who tried to quash the original acoustic data. The National Research Council was hired by the FBI because the problem was the House Select Committee in '78 said there's a probable conspiracy based on the acoustic data, and we recommend an investigation. Well, the FBI didn't want to redo the investigation. Government agencies are not going to spend a lot of money to embarrass themselves. So if they open the investigation up with being told they have to find a conspiracy, it's not a win situation for them. So what they did was they hired the National Research Council to cast doubt on the original data, which they did. But even they admitted they were being pretty picky about how the statistical analysis was done, and had some other issues as well. Well, then another fellow came out years later, works at the Department of Agriculture, and he wrote a very nice paper and published it in the Journal of Forensics and said, look, I did the acoustic analysis and I get a higher probability of a gunshot from the Grassy Knoll. I get 96%. The original guys did it wrong. I get a better one. So then in 2005, the famous scientist Norman Ramsey, I believe is one, published a paper in the same journal and said, no, this guy was wrong too. We redid the analysis and here's why it's wrong, blah, blah, blah. The key that you know it's right is that it matches up so well with the other piece of data that you have. That's why you want multiple independent instrumented records, because if they don't match up, something's glitched up. But if they're matching up perfectly, and this matches up, I mean, the shots going along the microphones in the reconstruction match up the speed of the motorcade exactly. That will not happen by accident.
That's right.
It just won't. I mean, the probability that happens is, again, astronomical. Not only that, but you can go shot by shot as determined from the Zapruder film, and you'll get a perfect match all the way around. Again, none of that's going to happen by accident. And I calculate in the book that the odds of all of that just happening randomly are like winning the lottery twice in a row. Buy a ticket tonight and win, buy a ticket tomorrow night and win. If you can do that, then you can discredit the acoustic analysis. If you can't, then you got to believe it, because those are the kind of odds you're facing. So it's some physical phenomena is causing both instruments to record, and that's how you get a confidence in science. And that's why I say scientific certainty, because this is the same technique I would use to study a transient event like a supernova or an earthquake.
There you go, folks, the science. The book is called Headshot. Our guest today, G. Paul Chambers. Easy way to get the book, www.nightfrightshow.com. Just click on the book cover. We'll take you right to a place you can order the book on.
You're listening to Night Fright, your voice in the dark for paranormal and conspiracy radio. The time is now. And now your host, Brent Holland.
Online. Now, I want to read a quote from the book, folks, because out of all the books I've ever read, and I'm going to give kudos to Paul here, this puts it into focus why it matters today in 2011, why President Kennedy was killed and why it matters. More than all the other books I've read, this says it all. And I'm going to read this. Without a true and meaningful understanding of the actual perpetrators and their motives involved in the assassination of John F. Kennedy, we have no real hope of preventing something like that happening again. Now, we've got to understand what took place November 22nd, 1963, folks, so that it does not repeat. History does not repeat itself, especially with the alarming similarities between President Kennedy's ideologies and President Barack Obama's ideologies. We've got to prevent that from happening again. Paul, what's next for you, my friend?
Well, I've toyed with the idea of following up on the Kennedy work and maybe trying to address the issue of who did it. That's a lot of research down the National Archives, and I'm not sure there's a bottom to it. I honestly think that an official investigation and the powers of the government need to be used to really uncover what's going on. But I am working on another book project that involves the issues of consciousness and possibilities for the afterlife. So I'm optimistic about that project, and hopefully I'll have something complete on that soon.
Well, I got to tell you, if it's as insightful as this book and as explosive as this book has been, you've got to come back on the show, my friend, without question.
So appreciate that.
Thank you.
You're listening to Night Fright, your voice in the dark for paranormal and conspiracy radio. The time is now. And now your host, Brent Holland.
We got to start to wrap up now. Folks, we've been speaking with our guest tonight, G. Paul Chambers, the book again, Headshot, The Science Behind the Kennedy Assassination. He has done his research. It is meticulous. He has used the laws of physics, which were the same, as I said all through the show, in 1963 as they are today. And he has found the fatal shot coming from, guess where? Yep, the Grassy Knoll. Conspiracy, 2 shooters at least, maybe more. Easy way to get the book and all the books and paraphernalia and stuff that all our guests have, www.nightfrightshow.com. This is a volunteer show, folks. Please make a donation. It'll help pay for the website. It'll keep the shows free. It'll pay for cameras, lights, earphones, computers, software, and the list is on and on and on. This show is put together by one person, me. I have to do all the research, read all the books. I have to edit the show after it's been taped. Please do let me know if you would like to see certain guests on the show. I'll do my best to get them. Once again, www.nightfrightshow.com. That is the focal point for this show. Please do enjoy all the shows there. They are free. Paul, I want to thank you for this book, for your research, your patriotism, and your courage to get it out there. Just astounding. Absolutely astounding.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Thanks for having me.
Looking forward to having you back on, my friend. I'm Brent Holland from Night Fright. See you next time.
You're listening to Night Fright and your host, Brent Holland. The time is now. Your voice in the dark for paranormal and conspiracy radio.